A social worker named Miss Milcom visited my brothers and I several times over the course of summer of 2003. I was 11, going on 12, and almost solely responsible for my brother's care at that point. At the beginning of that school year, my mother disappeared with my younger twin brothers and left me behind, presumably to escape CPS scrutiny for reasons I would never know. This is what I believed until a couple of weeks ago, when I received a cryptic letter with an old photo of my brothers. Even worse, one of my patients, a man named Michael, who was convicted of killing his baby, started telling me things about my brothers that he had no way of knowing. The sheriff's department immediately started to stonewall me, so I hired a private investigator named Dustin Contreras. According to him, my mother's corpse was discovered before I even entered high school. My brothers were nowhere to be found. No one was looking for them. No one cared. So I started investigating the disappearances on my own. I found a lot of horrific information that indicates one of my brothers was killed a long time ago. My coworker, Julie, basically smuggled me into the coroner's archives to take pictures of the reports and evidence. Afterward, I immediately went home and pored over the autopsy reports. The children's skeletal remains were a nightmare. Their mouths had been packed with loose teeth and ashes, then bound shut with red fabric. The bones of the lower extremities showed scorch marks. Tool marks indicated that the top halves had been butchered and basically peeled off. And of course, each skeleton bore strange carvings on all of the bones. I thought of Philip and cried until Julie called me late that evening. "We don't have anything on those kids here," she told me. "The department accidentally purged all the evidence in 2002. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. How does that even happen? My head was pounding, but there was something, right? She told me what I already knew. Oral cavities packed with ashes and teeth, bound with red fabric, and made a half-assed apology on behalf of the department. Like I said, not much. I passed all the information on to Dusty, as well as the detective in charge of my case. Neither responded. Luckily, I had an appointment scheduled with Dusty just a couple days later. I arrived early. When he saw me, his entire body somehow sank into itself. He wouldn't meet my eyes either. Up until then, in person and over the phone, he'd been incredibly driven, super excitable, the kind of guy who dives headfirst into every weird piece of information he can find. But no more. He trudged into the back office and closed the door.
"Have a seat, Miss Hammond."
He scratched his head, then slid into the chair across from me.
"First, your bodies. Those kids. I'll be straight. This is going to sound crazy to you, but it's a coincidence. First, the victims' names aren't verified. Peter, Petra, Philip, none of those appear anywhere but those old reports. Legally, they're John and Jane Doe's. Next, the sheriff found all those bodies at a ranch that was, until recently, owned by a man named Basha Alder. He used to be a cop back in the day, so there's another coincidence. Anyway, he died in April and passed the ranch on to an heir named Tatiana Romanov.
Excuse my language, but how the fuck is this all a coincidence? Dusty closed his eyes briefly.
Listen, he didn't have anything to do with the deaths. According to the police reports, he cooperated fully with each investigation and was generally out of town whenever the bodies were discovered. They attributed the deaths to a probable cult that's been blamed for everything from child abductions to dead cats. Point is, there's nothing much to do there.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I also knew he wasn't budging on this. At least not right now. What about Michael Altair? He rubbed his face fretfully.
Look, nothing's adding up, and I don't know how much farther I can go.
He drummed his fingers against the desk, then leaned down and pulled out a folder. His hands hovered over the paperwork for a long moment, then he extracted a few pages and slid them in front of me. They were photos, candid shots of a ridiculously handsome middle-aged man and his ridiculously beautiful wife, maybe mid-50s and early 30s, respectively. They were in a dimly lit, expensive-looking restaurant. He looked radiant, and she looked sick. A hint of Dusty's enthusiasm returned.
This man lives in Michael Altair's house, spends a lot of time with Michael Altair's wife, and visits Michael Altair's son.
My stomach clenched, but I waited.
Of course, he goes by Michael Altair.
Then, what's the problem? Dusty hesitated again, practically projecting his internal struggle. Then he slid an old driver's license across the table. Richard Alder, the man in the photo, was clearly a younger version of the guy in the candid shot. At a guess, maybe 30 or 35. The license had an issue date of 1982. A little weird, but maybe Alder just aged really well. Then I saw his birth date. January 8th, 1910. Where did you get this?
His wife, she's not well. Not really.
He leaned back and drummed his fingers again.
Look, Richard Alder is pretty clearly an assumed identity of some kind. I know your Alder's a creep, and I don't know what's going on between you and him. You have my sympathy regardless, but I'm not comfortable acting as a middleman for a vendetta, however justified it is.
What are you talking about? He nearly rolled his eyes.
Let's not do this.
No, tell me what you mean.
I know that this Alder is shady. I don't believe for a second that he's a good guy, but what your mother did isn't his fault.
What the hell are you talking about? Anger flashed across his face and he gave me a grim smile.
Okay, let's play a game, Miss Hammond. Your mother had an affair with Alder. Your brothers are his kids, but your birth father chose to raise them as his own. Fine. Happens. Good on him. But your dad dies, and your mom wants back with Alder. He turns her down. He doesn't want her, doesn't want your brothers. So she takes those boys and does God knows what before killing herself up at the campground.
He sent a stapled police report across the desk.
Straight from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. The report also says you were notified, so I don't know, ma'am. I'm sorry. Alder's a bastard, but your mom's decision was her own, and I can no longer help you.
With that, he gave me a stack of slim file folders and sent me on my way. I didn't know what to say. I wouldn't have known how to say it even if I did. Somehow, that visit was less disappointing than the meeting with Detective Moser an hour later.
Miss Hammond,
he said brusquely. His office was too hot. Beads of sweat glimmered on his brow.
I just don't know. This looks like an attention grab to me.
I'm sorry, what?
There's nothing here that you couldn't do yourself. The letter, the old picture, this all looks like a hoax.
But I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. They're lost. My mom.
Recovered in L.A. I know it. That's not our jurisdiction. It never was.
There's a missing persons case, a missing child case. I know interdepartmental communication isn't the best, sir. I work here, but now that you have the information...
I think you found some information you didn't like about a rich man and decided to try to disrupt his life while refusing to grasp the context of the situation.
What context? He gave me a smug look.
Women in love aren't rational.
We argued. I ended up screaming at Moser and got escorted off the premises for my trouble. In a last-ditch effort of some kind of investigative help, I went to the regional newspaper office. I tried to explain what I'd seen and what information I had, but I sounded crazy. How could I not? The receptionist told me to make an appointment. In tears by that point, I went home and threw a massive screaming tantrum. When I finally calmed down, I went through all the information Dusty compiled. It's a gold mine, a horrifying, hideous, confusing gold mine. Police reports, autopsy reports, birth records, Michael Alter's address, and the name of a bar where Richard Alter works. And children, so many more little Jane and John Does scattered across the state like a geocaching game from hell. I kept thinking of Philip and Patrick, lounging in cheap Kmart lawn chairs, watching lightning storms flash over a roiling twilight sky. Of course, our isolated little lives as a modern-day boxcar children, taking care of each other in the woods. And I thought of Miss Milcom, with her lush, wild hair and sunset-colored eyes, of the insanity she'd conjured in the shed. How much of that was real? Had I seen my mother harm my brothers and blocked it out? Replaced her with a sinister other? The proverbial bushy-haired stranger? I cried for hours, then kept poring over the files, and I found something new. My patient, Michael, arguably started this wild goose chase. Michael's infant daughter, Sarita, went missing under peculiar circumstances. Michael hysterically confessed that he'd kill the baby to save it. He was tried and convicted, even though his apartment yielded no evidence of the act. The baby's skeletal remains were discovered, marked and scorched. The same ranch as Peter and Petra and Philip and Philippa's. The ranch was owned by good old Basha Alder. Until that point, the only documentation I could find referred to the baby as Sarita. Michael even refers to her as Sarita. But her legal name was Sarai Hammond. Thing is, that's my name, too. Chills rolled up and down my body. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, and I uttered a dry, involuntary sob. What was I supposed to do? The police don't care. Dusty's a lost cause. I love Julie, but she's just a cop groupie at heart. And even if all of them were willing to listen, what could I say? What wouldn't sound insane? I needed proof. Apparently all the dead bodies didn't count. But maybe a live one would. A growing sense of calm slowly suffocated my panic. That was it. I needed to find my brother. Fortunately, I had his home address and his place of work, thanks to Dusty. Somehow, I slept. In the morning, I loaded up and made the 2-hour drive to LA. Patrick, I kept reminding myself, my brother Patrick, lived in a gated apartment complex in Hollywood. Like the vast majority of the city, it was distinctly unglamorous and almost unsettlingly grimy. I parked and took several minutes to prepare myself. I scanned the photos, the texts, the birth certificate, and the police report several times, ensuring I had everything. Then I got out and wove through the complex until I found his door. I stared at it for what felt like a very long time. The sun beat down on my neck, coming and receding in waves. Finally, I knocked. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there he was. Silky yellow hair, mismatched eyes, and a preternatural complexion like gold-tinged porcelain. A beautiful little boy grown into an almost inhumanly beautiful adult. He smiled affably.
Hi, can I help you?
I tried to answer, but only choked as tears flooded my eyes. Concern quickly overtook his smile.
Miss, I'm sorry, are you alright?
He covertly scanned the area.
Are you running from someone? Do you need help?
I took a deep, shuddering breath and desperately tried to swallow the lump in my throat. My name is Sarai Hammond. I think you're my brother. Pity touched his face and he smiled again.
I don't have a sister.
The air was still and heavy, almost suffocating. Sunlight glanced off trees and rails and their carefully manicured grass, creating 1,000 shards of misplaced gold. Patrick, the name issued in a breathy, wet gasp. Where's Philip? Something crossed his face, an emotional fissure opening under that sweet, assured smile. Where did Miss Milcom take you? Who's Mr. Ball? I held out the Polaroid, old and creased, showing the boys and a woman in a bull mask looming behind them. His hands started to shake. He kept glancing between me and the photo, his confused smile battling with a rictus of horror. It was awful to see, like two faces, two people vying for dominance within a single body. He smiled again right as he started to cry.
Sometimes I think you're a dream.
I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the cryptic messages from the unknown number. Did you send me these? He squinted, seemingly oblivious to the fact that he was sobbing.
No, that's Rachel. Oh my god, that was Rachel.
Who's Rachel?
Nobody.
He carefully took the photo from my hands and studied it, wide-eyed and somehow tender. He gently touched the woman in the mask.
Right now, she's Gabrielle.
He looked up suddenly. His face was different, not frightened, sad or confused. Angry, fevered, almost old somehow.
You need to leave.
Patrick!
Go away!
His face broke apart again, fissure opening and closing, terror and cold rage checkering his features.
I don't know you.
It doesn't matter. It's okay. You're my brother. I'm going to help you. Something awful happened to you and I need to know what it is. A dim, resigned cruelty rose from the fissure that settled onto his face.
You don't know anything. You never did. You never will.
He backed away and started to close the door. In a panic, I grabbed his arm. He immediately threw me off. Patrick! I yelled. Please come back!
To what? For what?
He stalked forward. I stumbled back and nearly fell.
You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I am. You don't know who I am. Your brother's dead.
A terrible weight had been building in my chest, the kind that traps your breath and crushes your words. But you're here. His face twisted, then hardened.
Don't come back.
My brother, my only family, my only hope, stalked back into his apartment and slammed the door. After a long crying jag, I went ahead and tried to go to Michael Altair's house out of sheer desperation. No dice. It's tucked into a canyon behind an honest-to-God wall. Numb despair set in. This was it. Patrick recognized me, but he didn't care. The police didn't care. Dusty thought I hated Alder because my mother killed my brothers. I don't know what I would have done if my phone hadn't started buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out, fumbling and nearly dropping it. Some of the despair eased, giving way to fear and excitement. Alder, 9382. Stay away from the house. Go home now. I'll come to you, I promise. I held my breath, waiting for the ridiculous sorry wrong number sign-off. Instead, I got this. Mr. Ball will see you soon. I went home. There was nothing else to do. It's been several days. I thought I'd have some kind of resolution by now. I did try to contact law enforcement and tell them Richard Altair is my missing brother. I keep following up, to no avail. No one's come to see me. Not Patrick, not the texter, certainly not Mr. Ball. One way or another, I hope that changes soon. I went back to work as soon as I could. I had to. My paid leave had run its course, and I needed money to live. Besides, going back meant I'd have access to reports, databases, and resources I could use to help my brother. Given that Dusty had dropped my case and Julie was ignoring me, I needed that access desperately. I wasn't supposed to handle Michael's therapy, but county jails are county jails, with overworked, undertrained, and overpressured county staff. There are days when everyone, exhausted, angry, or verging on burnout, calls out except you. That happened the day I went back to work, which meant I had to take care of Michael. The moment I opened Michael's cell, he ran out and snatched a pin from my pocket. The deputy, an entire flight of stairs below, didn't even notice. Michael regarded me with a mixture of ecstasy and horror that made me panic.
Mr. Ball is coming,
he whispered urgently.
He knows I told you. He's gonna make me do something now. It's not your fault. Officer, this is not her fault, okay?
Michael stabbed himself with the pin before I could react, screeching as he dug it through his arm like an oar from hell. Blood welled quickly, impossibly, gushing over him like a reverse whirlpool. Then he spun around and smeared his blood all over the wall, forming 3 sloppy, dripping words. Love from Amon. The guard finally appeared in the doorway, stern and cold. Michael immediately fell to his knees and smashed his head into the toilet. Jail toilets are solid bricks of iron. And he made quick work of himself. Teeth and blood flew across the room. His head dented, then caved. It was ethereal and dreamy, oddly slow. I saw the dent form, saw it become deep and wide as blood sheeted over it, then deeper and wider, and then he crumbled to the floor. The guard's cold facade had long since shattered. He sobbed into his radio, begging for assistance. My knees felt like they'd evaporated. I lowered myself to the ground, dimly aware of the wet warmth as Michael's blood soaked through my pants. Michael's face was a convex ruin. Shards of teeth erupted from his mouth, stabbing the remains of lips that had split all the way up to his nose. I knelt in his blood, eyes trained on the message above. Love from Amon. Help finally arrived. Michael was still breathing when they evacuated him, but he died on the way to the hospital. I was formally suspended within the hour, with pay, but that wouldn't last long. Therapists who watch their patients commit suicide don't last long. Never mind that he'd written the auditory equivalent of my name on the wall. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped in a nightmare. Every time I turned, I expected to see Miss Milcom, ember-eyed and smiling, or the mysterious Mr. Ball, who in my mind was a hulking, unspeakable darkness. Paranoia swallowed me swiftly. I eventually locked myself in my apartment, partly to wait, partly to pore over everything Dusty had given me again. He'd gathered a great deal of information on my mother that I'd skipped over before. I was too concerned with my brothers and Michael Alder to bother with my mother. The first irregularity was her birth certificate, or rather, birth certificates. On the first, she had no parents on record. Her birth certificate had several blank fields. On the second, her parents were listed as Basha Alder and Christine Amon. Dusty also obtained her autopsy reports from LA County. Again, there were 2 versions. One stated that her body, which was too decomposed to ascertain her cause of death, was located in a campground. The other stated that her bones featured strange, rune-like marks and that she'd been discovered on a property owned by Michael Altair. By midnight, I was trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of laughing and crying. The colors in my rooms were too bright and rich, like someone had trapped me in a cartoon. The shadows held too many colors, and the light was too flat. My head was buzzing, my stomach hurt, and my throat felt cold and slimy, like I was coming down with a fever, but of course I was. I'd played slip and slide in Michael's blood on a jail floor, breeding ground of filth and bacterial crust and MRSA, and my throat clicked. I kicked back, sure I was going to vomit and unwilling to ruin my documents. Then the urge subsided as abruptly as it had come. I pulled the photo of my brothers and set it beside our mother's autopsy report. I tried to focus, tried to let the pain simply be pain without the horrific overtones of paranoia and terror, but things moved into my periphery. Those colorful shadows encroached, sliding silently over the room like the ghost of an oil slick. Within that oil slick, glimmering like gemstones, were a pair of eyes. My stomach flipped, and I fought the urge to look. You're imagining it, I told myself. Seeing things, just seeing things that aren't there. Then another pair flared to life, glittering serene black, so much darker yet so much brighter than the shadows around it. Then more, and more, and more. Green and blue, yellow and amber, chocolate and hazel, gray and violet, the gazes of 100 impassive gods. Then suddenly, they blinked out, in ones and pairs and trios, extinguishing like candle flames. The floor creaked and the shadows spun together, reminding me absurdly of a cotton candy machine, as they spiraled together and became a small and terribly solid figure. Eyes blazed like embers for the briefest moment, then changed, became mismatched. One brown and one blue. The phantom darkness receded with a sly swiftness that made me wonder if it had ever really existed, leaving a desperately familiar little boy in its wake.
Why?
Philip quavered.
Did you let her take us?
Everything inside me seemed to evaporate, leaving me a gutless, spineless, matterless rag doll.
You were supposed to watch us.
A shrill, breathy sob ensued. Recalling a memory with such vivid force, I burst into tears. The day Philip accidentally shot Patrick in the face with a BB gun. They'd run in, Patrick shrieking, Philip uttering those horrifying, squealing gasps that made me think he was dying. I could practically see them standing in my living room. Patrick clutching his face as blood trickled down his cheek, and Philip, puffy-eyed and struggling to speak.
You knew.
Patrick breathed.
You were happy we were gone. They told us so. You thought we deserved it. You let them take us because you didn't love us.
No, I whispered.
They made us fight each other to see who was stronger. The loser had to go to Mr. Ball's friend.
His face crumpled and tears streamed down his face.
Patrick won.
The room began to swim. I realized I wasn't breathing. Wet blotches of scarlet blossomed across Philip's narrow chest.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't help them hurt him.
His face crumpled, then suddenly hardened into a wild rictus of hate.
So he won, and he hurt me. He didn't even need help. He just did it.
His chest warped upward and split open, making me scream. The incision widened roughly open, as if an invisible monster were hacking him apart. Bloody, flesh-colored snakes rose from his arms. It was such a surreal sight that I didn't quite realize what I was seeing. Not snakes, but skin. Flayed skin, stripping itself from his bones. I tried to cry, but barely managed a raspy, wet whistle. Philip screamed and writhed, flailing against restraints I couldn't see. His skin continued to slow away, arms and legs, chest and back. Finally his face. Blood streamed from every surface and every orifice, flooding to my floor. The puddle crept toward me, silent assurance contrasting sharply with my brother's tortured throes.
It's your fault. That's what they told me. You wanted us dead. You let them have us so you could have a better life. I died thinking you hated me. I died hating you.
A final miserable scream exploded from him. Then his head caved abruptly, just like Michael's. His eyes and the bridge of his nose disappeared into a skull. All that remained was a small, bulbous forehead and a hideously upturned tip of his nose. They met in the middle of his face, looking more like a deformity than an injury. Each one of my muscles fought to collapse. I realized I was tearing my own hair. Coarse strands of yellow hair tangled between my fingers. My face hurt, beyond raw, beyond stinging. It felt flayed, burnt. I was afraid to touch it. Then Philip jerked, and in a single fluid motion, sat, rose to his haunches, and slid towards me. That face, so absurdly like a fallen cake, hovered mere feet from my own. Half a bulging, bloody eye peeked below the crumpled overhang of his forehead, no longer blue or brown, but a queer amber orange.
What would you do for your brother?
I thought my heart would burst, horror and hope intertwined, growing and threatening to rupture my heart. Anything. The misshapen slope of his mouth broke into a smile. He took my hand. His fingers were small and tacky, feverishly hot.
Promise?
I promise. His hand went to my face. I thought it was a caress, but his fingers suddenly tightened, burning nails digging into my skin, and tore a piece of flesh away. I watched, frozen, as he placed it on his tongue and swallowed. Then he stood and hobbled to my bedroom door. I watched, dazed and only dimly aware of the awful pain in my cheek. As he opened it, past the frame, I saw, not bed or dresser or rug or window, but a dark, glittering room, dancing firelight reflected off the polished floor. I tried to stand, but my muscles wouldn't obey. Philip threw a glance over his narrow, flayed shoulder. His face was horror beyond comprehension. The sight made me weep. He smiled again, broken teeth glinting under that ruptured, ember-colored eye. Then he crossed the threshold and closed the door. The moment he disappeared, panic reared up and propelled me to my room. I threw open the door, but saw only my room. Ordinary and untidy, no firelight, no marble floors, no Philip. I spun around helplessly. Blood covered the floorboards in the middle of those horrific, snaky strips of my brother's skin and spelled the words, "Love of Amon." Somehow I slept. I woke around dawn, cleaned up the mess, bandaged my face, and tried to call Dusty. I don't really know why, I guess to beg him for help one more time. He didn't answer, so I went to his office. The lights were all blazing, but the opening was covered by a pull-down grate. Out of desperation, I tried the grate. I know they're normally locked, but this is an old, neglected, decaying mall, so after a quick glance in both directions, I gave an experimental push. And it went up. Unable to believe my luck, I darted inside. The smell hit me almost immediately. Cloudy and humid, sweet and corrupt. I knew what it was in an instant. I found Dusty's body slouched at his desk. He was naked, his skin a marbled horror of plucked chicken yellow and bruisey black. His eyes, dull and cloudy, yet glittering, had sunk halfway into his skull. Dry lips had begun to recede from his teeth. Both his hands were gone. His desk was empty. The computers, files, and supplies had been smashed against the wall. In their place were dull, discolored things like sticks spelling out 3 words. Love to Amon. I called the police and was promptly arrested. It felt like forever. I wept for my brothers, my mother, Dusty, and myself. They pulled me from the holding cell just a few hours later, shoved a property retrieval ticket into my hand, and pushed me out into the dusk. My keys and wallet were in the evidence facility, which closed at 5. It was already 7. Without cash, keys, phone, or ID, I'd resigned myself to walking 2 hours to Julie's when a sleek white car pulled up to the curb. I eyed it suspiciously as the driver's window went down. It was a deputy, thick-set and friendly, a bit like a clean-cut Samwise Gamgee.
Courtesy shuttle for employees. I'll take you where you need to go.
I was so tired and scared, it didn't occur to me that the incarceration of sheriff's personnel couldn't possibly be common enough to warrant a shuttle, so I climbed into the back seat. I realized I wasn't the only passenger just as the doors all locked. I recognized him immediately from the photos, lean and dark-haired with jewel-bright eyes and a face far too young for 50, let alone 108. A pleasant, smoky scent drifted off him, like a bushfire mixed with caramel.
You look just like your brother.
He had the perfect voice, smooth, gentle baritone with a faint European clip. Your son, I whispered.
In a way.
The car pulled away from the curb.
Settle in and calm down. You won't be hurt tonight. I'm only taking you to see your brother.
Dusk had deepened, leavened only by the remnants of a dying sunset, which weren't so much light as colored shadows. I felt sick and ill, like I was in a fever dream. My mother died at your house.
Your mother meant to abscond with her charges and was punished. I did not punish her.
Then why did they find her at your house?
Leverage.
The car pulled into traffic. 10,000 questions clawed into my throat, creating a paralyzing psychic bottleneck.
Listen to me. You have stumbled upon an empire no one sees, controlled by powers you will never understand.
The bottleneck suddenly broke, and I sputtered, "Was Miss Milcom one of you?" His facade, calm, impersonally cheerful, broke. All at once, he looked tired and sick.
Milcom is much more than that.
"What about Michael's baby?" The question surprised me. Sarita.
Your half-sister, a little princess just like you, with the same name and an entirely different purpose.
The others, Philippa, Petra, Peter?
Gifts to bind two entities.
I didn't understand this, and didn't want to. What happened to my brothers? Tears swam in my eyes, stinging hot.
Everything that was intended. That is why I'm here. You do not understand what Richard...
His name is Patrick.
Yes, he is Patrick. And depending on the occasion, the need, and the handler, he is also Richard, Jonathan, David, and Raphael.
Another delicate pause. I couldn't tell if he felt sorry for me, or if he was simply mocking me.
I don't know what you believed. I don't know what you told yourself, what justifications or nightmares ran through your head. Whatever they were, I promise you, the reality is much worse.
Why did you take them instead of me?
Old gods are hungry.
The impression of being in a fever dream redoubled, making me nauseous.
If we let them have their way, that is to say, if we feed them everything they asked for, there would be no balance.
Terrible images filled my head. Michael smashing his own head in. Babies butchered and burned until all that remained were bones inscribed with names of forgotten demons. My mother murdered and hidden in a rich man's yard. And Philip, poor Philip, who died hating and feeling hatred while our brother killed him. So your child murder is the secret to universal harmony?
One way or another, gods need flesh and blood and bone. They do, and give anything to get them.
I thought of his house, a mission-inspired manor nestled in some of the most expensive land on Earth, of his beautiful wife, of my beautiful brother, of Alder's expensive suit and his sleek, silent car. Hysterical laughter thumped against my ribs, but didn't quite dare to escape.
A mutually beneficial arrangement. You sacrifice people, innocent people, children, babies.
I don't. A hint of urgency colored his tone.
But the world has always been this way. It will always be this way.
The smoky, sweet smell was no longer pleasant. The beginnings of a headache prodded at my temples, pressurized and sharp. What happened to Philip?
Your brothers were handpicked by Milcom. They were trained, as I was, as your father was. Then they were made to fight. The winner moved forward, the loser was punished by the winner, then given over to the trainer as a treat, as is custom.
Is he alive? The words shattered into a dozen pieces, broken and mismatched in tone and pitch.
Treats are for consumption, are they not?
At that moment, I would have given anything to die. We passed 2 small towns and entered a third, driving long after houses gave way to golden hills and rocky slopes. Finally, we reached a long, curving road marked with a street sign that read Balder Lane. Balder Lane snaked up a massive hill and deposited us atop a breathtaking plateau. Directly across from an equally breathtaking house, 4 elegant wrought iron numbers gleamed beside the door. 9382. Alder let me out. I thought about bolting, but to what end? The hill was steep and rocky, peppered with boulders and twisted valley oaks. I'd kill myself scaling the hill. If I tried the road, the car would catch me in an instant. Dusk swiftly deepened to blue darkness, swallowing the breathtaking view of city, valley, and sweeping hills below. An unseasonably brutal wind whistled past, sweeping my hair and my neck and knifing through my clothes.
Come inside.
He led me to the house. The moment our feet touched the porch, the front door flew open, revealing a rich, golden wedge of light. Alder led me through, past a frantic woman in a stunning dress. "Michael, Gabrielle is no longer in She broke off when she noticed me. Creases streaked across her face, cutting lines into the thick layer of makeup powder.
Who is this?
Richard's sister. Mr. Ball invited her personally.
Her eyes flicked to the ugly divot in my cheek.
But Aman...
Clearly gave its blessing, using Ball's own language. I will see to Gabrielle.
He steered me through a golden entrance hall, past a parlor echoing with soft laughter and crystalline tinkling, beyond several closed doors and a spiral staircase, to a door at the very end of the hall. Alder rapped curtly. Inside, a woman started to scream, but not nearly loud enough to drown his words.
You know, all the world's a stage.
She abruptly fell silent.
Please open the door. I've brought Richard's sister.
The door opened. Alder strode in, pulling me behind him. It was a small, swelteringly hot room, lined with mirrors. Elaborate masks hung from pegs set into the wall. Jars and bottles lined the gleaming counter. It reminded me of a dressing room. The tall, beautiful woman weeping in the closest chair reinforced that impression. Alder made me sit next to her, then took the seat on the other side.
She now belongs to Ball because of you, so tell her about her brother.
I tried to save him. Her eyes were unfocused, voice hysterical and wandering. He knows. I told him. I proved to him about bluebirds and blackbirds. I told him what he is, what they'll make him do. He said he didn't care. He wants his life to be worth something. He doesn't want everything he went through to be for nothing. Since he had to suffer so much for so long, he wants his reward. Her face twisted miserably, then hardened as she turned to Alder. Where is he?
In the pit.
Not him. Where's Thomas? What did you do with Thomas?
He's by the sea, right where you left him.
She released a frustrated scream.
Calm down. You'll be on stage soon.
She seized strangely, then clumsily buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders heaved. No, she whispered. No, I won't. No, I won't. No, 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 no. Then she gave a great shudder and seemed to melt, flattening against the counter. I waited, heart pounding against my ribs. Finally, she looked up with a smile. I jumped. Her eyes were preternaturally bright, halfway between honey and flame. She touched my injured cheek. Blood of Oman, pledged to Ball. I didn't know what to say, though Philip, flayed, broken, crushed, and bleeding, filled my mind's eye. She smiled. This is a life-changing night for Richard. Let's try and look like it. She quickly picked an assortment of makeup jars from her counter and the drawers beneath. What followed was the most surreal makeover of my life. My mind and body tried to fight, but every time anger, rage, or panic reared up, those yellow eyes fixed on mine, and nothing seemed to matter. Alder watched silently until the end. When she turned me toward the mirror, a porcelain doll stared back at me. Wide blue eyes and snowy skin set off by corn silk hair. I didn't look real, but then I didn't feel real. She smiled, fired on my snow, and said, You look just like him. I wanted to ask who she meant, but didn't have the courage. Thank you. My name is Gabriel. Come, it is nearly time to see your brother. She led me out of the room. Alder followed. Together we moved through the stunningly opulent home. Gold and white everywhere, an entire mansion built from gilded light, until we reached a second staircase. At the bottom was a single door of dark wood, wreathed in an ornate frame. Gabriel guided me through. I froze. Black, glimmering walls towered into the darkness above, at least 3 times as tall as the house itself. Vines draped the walls and hung from the corners, drooping with luminescent blossoms. Velvet seats circled a deep pit rimmed in gold, and at the head of the pit, an altar stood between 2 ivory poles topped with burning torches. On the opposite wall hung a stunning banner of a golden bull's head. Gabriel led me to a seat nearest the altar. Wait here, she told me. Then she and Alder disappeared through a small, recessed door to my left. It might have been a minute, it might have been a day, but eventually 3 doors opened together. One behind the altar, one to the right, and the one Gabriel had gone through. People flooded through, all wearing robes and ornate animal masks. They streamed past without so much as a glance in my direction. When every seat had finally filled, the chamber went dark. Only torchlight remained. The door opened again. I heard a whispery rush as every head turned, and there he was. Richard strode solemnly into the room, carrying a large, wriggling bundle under his arm. He walked along the edge of the pit and knelt before the altar. A moment later, something huge and golden danced in the darkness, slowly resolving into the shape of a bull's head, a headdress, overlarge and breathtakingly ornate, clinking with chains of gemstones. The wearer was a tall woman, naked except for a skirt that danced around her hips like a phantom. She stopped at the altar and removed her headdress. I was not surprised to see that it was Gabriel. She balanced the bull mask atop the left torch. Fire blazed and danced from its eyes and jaw. It almost looked alive. Richard set the bundle on the altar. Rachel unwrapped it carefully, revealing a squirming infant. Fine yellow-white hair coated its scalp, gleaming in the firelight.
"Blood and bone and flesh of mine,"
Richard murmured.
"tendered to the lords of earth."
Gabriel extracted a gleaming blade from beneath the altar. The child did not even have a chance to scream. When she finished, she balanced a tiny blood-filled skull cap in her hands. The drained, decapitated body lay forgotten in a pool of congealing blood and brain matter. Gabriel rounded the altar. Richard looked up at her as she delicately tipped the skull cap. Blood dripped onto his hair, his face, and his open mouth. The person next to me grabbed my hand. I rolled around. Philip again. Broken and smashed. The warped remains of his mouth bit into a smile. Gabriel's voice suddenly rang out. "Amon's daughter, willing maidservant of Baal, approach your brother to whom you swore aid." But he was right there. Philip was here at my side. I turned and saw an empty seat. My cheek flared with pain as horror twisted around my heart. Had Philip, or the thing wearing Philip's skin, ever said Philip's name? I had no time or energy to ponder. I stood and obediently went to the altar. I slipped on the polished rim of the pit and nearly fell, but Richard caught me. "Kneel," he said. I did. Gabriel pressed the skull cap to my lips. 3 small, lukewarm drops of blood slid onto my tongue. "Given over and willingly bound, your master's honor and reward shall reflect upon you," Gabriel began. Her voice became thin and distant, like a faraway song carried on a wind. Overhead, the bull's blazing eyes danced and blazed. I leaned over and threw up. I woke, sore and bruised, with a salty metallic tang in my mouth. I shot up, gasping, and saw my own sun-drenched bedroom. Cleaner than it has ever been, but undeniably mine. The only thing out of place was a piece of trash on my dresser. Only it wasn't trash, but a note. This is what happened, and what it said. Gabriel broke Patrick into pieces, into other people. She couldn't break Philip. Your brother Patrick didn't kill Philip. Richard killed him. Richard consecrated himself. Patrick did not. Baal bound you to Richard. If Richard dies, you will be free. Don't trust me, even if I come to you. There are too many people inside me. I'll send someone to you. His name is Thomas. I am so sorry. Richard will come to you soon. Do what he says. It only lasts until he dies. I am so sorry. I promise I will fix this. I checked my house, shaking the entire time, empty and terribly clean. I went back to the bed and slept for days. Richard did come for me. He needs help with many things. Most, though not all, are mundane. I won't tell you what they are. There's no point. I don't have many answers, but this entire thing reaches far, farther than my country. It's a religion, an ancient, bloody, hideous religion that yields riches and power to the right people. I won't be able to stop it, but I have hope. Last night, a man came to my door, dark-eyed and olive-skinned, with beautiful russet hair and a weather-beaten face. Not old, but ill-used. He smelled like a cold wind and sand and seawater.
"My name is Thomas. Rachel sent me. I know you don't know me, but I'm here to help. Let me sleep here. Maybe a night, maybe 2.
Then what?
Then we save your brother."
I let him in and directed him to my bedroom, where he quickly collapsed. He hasn't moved since. I'm terrified. Richard can come at any moment. He does that, pops in randomly with no advance warning. I hope he stays away, and I hope Thomas wakes up soon. I'm ready. I really will do anything for my brother. Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed this story. I wanted to come and put a little aside in here to let everyone know that this is the last part of the series. the author didn't write any more. This is supposed to be the end, and it kind of ends pretty abruptly, but it picks up a little bit in one of her other series. It's connected. I think just the lore and universe is connected, and the other series is called My Husband Killed My Stalker, and that is going to be the next story that I do. But I just wanted to let everyone know, because I know that with this ending, there's just going to be a lot of people asking, where's the next part? Why does it end like that? And that's why she decided to make it end really ambiguously like this. So I will do the next part. Hopefully we can get some answers, because a lot of stuff happened in this last part. That's kind of crazy. A lot of characters are introduced all of a sudden that we don't really know who they are. And I think that at least some of the characters will come back in that other series. So I'll do that as soon as I can. At the end of this series, I really started to connect with the main character. I hate that it ended so abruptly, because I finally started to feel bad for her kind of at the very end here. She just became so broken after she saw her little brother in that nightmare. So I don't know. I really finally started to connect with her, and now the story's over. I don't know. Maybe we'll see a little more of what happens, but from what I've gathered, I don't think we specifically see what happens to her, but I guess we'll see. I just hope that you liked the story. I had a fantastic time making it. And I'll see you next time. Jesus Christ!
What's this?
I'm in the middle of recording. It's the Dark Somnium, everybody.
Not for long.
Oh God!